Very thrilled to have our guests tonight. As I said to them, I'm going to let them introduce themselves because their history is so amazing and varied, and they're going to dive into it better than I can, that's for sure.
Okay, I'm David Bieber, and I have an archives in Norwood, Massachusetts, the Norwood Space Center. I've got about 10,000 square feet of archival material, artifacts, toys and treasures that I acquired a lot of times right here in the Fenway, because I've worked at a number of locations going back to the 1970s. Most recently, I've been involved with the Verve Hotel, which is kind of right around the corner at 1271. And I've been involved with the Verve since before it was the Verve, when it was still kind of Howard Johnson's, and it was on the verge of meeting the wrecking ball, but it never did because Steve Samuels, the developer, decided to keep the architectural bones and preserve it, and he wanted to have a music, media, and pop culture celebration of everything that had emerged out of the Fenway. And we stretched the boundaries a little bit. It's more Boston in totality, but if you go into the lobby, if you go into the corridors, even individual rooms, for example, there's an Aerosmith room, there's a Cars room, but that's been a kind of celebration of Fenway clubs, music, rehearsal spaces, publications. Before the Verve, I spent 19 years at the Boston Phoenix, which was at 126 Brookline Avenue, and also that was the kind of satellite headquarters for the company-owned WFNX, which was based in Lynn, but a lot of work was done right around the corner here as well. And before that, I spent 16 years as the Creative Services Director at WBCN, which was right next door to the Verve one time, which was the Howard Johnson's. And as I told people, in those days, you know, the salespeople from WBCN, if they wanted to entertain a client, they had two choices to go to lunch: McDonald's, Burger King. That was it. You could see the tumbleweeds rolling down Boylston Street, and you know, if you went to the Howard Johnson's, usually the only safe food there was in the vending machines in the basement. So, but there were many people who stayed at the Howard Johnson's. You know, historically, everyone from the Ramones to Tony Bennett to Joe Strummer. So there's a very colorful history out of this whole neighborhood, and I'm really happy and proud to have been a part of it. Even going back into the 1970s, where I worked at a place called Music Promotions, and that was in that upper Boylston block off of Mass Ave that now I think Berkeley owns a lot of. That's where like Little Steve's House of Pizza and Jack's Drum Shop, and I worked at this place at 1126 Boylston Street, and one of our projects was early management of Modern Lovers with Jonathan Richmond. So that's a little capsule statement. I picked up so many things because of my work affiliations, and I've managed to keep intact my collection through the years. I do installations, I do exhibits, various locations around town and hopefully around the world. So the estimate is that there's up to 2 million artifacts at the Norwood Space Center. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Very good. My name is Duane, Lucia. I'm the founder of the Gallery East. For the last 15 years, I've been involved with the West End Museum, so I've become a student of urban history. Like probably 90% of the people who live in Boston, I came here to college in 1972. I started coming into the city before then. A friend of mine who was Armenian used to go to the Syrian markets down in the South End, so I know all about the, you know, the New York streets in that area down there. And we found out when we were 18, when we were 17, that the drinking age was lowered to 18, and you could get into clubs, especially Katie's, and I keep telling people, oh yeah, I saw Aerosmith at the Rat, but it wasn't the Rat that I saw them at, it was Katie's that I saw them at. So I will mention that today. For the last 7 years, I've been involved with the Four Point Arts community, and have seen the Seaport. My first job in my freshman year of college, was working at Pier 4, so you can imagine the culture shock that I experienced living down there now and working down there. It's like a whole new city was just dropped right on the waterfront there. So completely different from when there were, you know, Pier 4, Jimmy's Harborside, and the Nonant. But it's very intriguing to see how much Boston has changed, and you know, I'm sure we all, you know, if we've lived here for any length of time, we've seen that changes. It seems recently it's changing a little bit quicker, and we'd all like it, but you know, that is Monera, you know, instant gratification, including buildings. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit with David about the different venues in the Fenway. A few years ago back, I did an exhibition over at the Time Out Market called Fenway Flashback, and it was all these photographs of an artist who was down here between 1975 and 1990, documenting most of it. His name was Phil Flash. So a lot of the photographs that you'll see tonight are his, and many of the posters are either from David's archive or stuff that I've, you know, lifted off the internet. I also made a movie a couple of years ago called All Ages, the Boston Hardcore Film, and it documented a lot of the music scene from between 1981 and 1985. And a lot of these images were collected, posters were collected in pursuit of making the film. So, you know, sort of all comes together at some point. I did exclude some of the considerations. We'll talk about Kenmore Square, which is a big one, obviously. Lansdowne Street, which could be a presentation in and of itself. I worked at 15 Lansdowne Street back in 1975, so I think I was at the club the night that John Addison, who was one of the owners, hired, what's his name? Pat Lyons to run the club, and then Pat Lyons went on to buy the club, and then he's now the owner, I believe, of House of the Blues. The other area was Boylston Street. I could never leave off Boylston Street, because when we worked at 15 Lansdowne Street, we would go over to the 1270 to hear, you know, music by Jimmy Stewart, who was an incredible disc jockey, and I think hands down everybody agreed that he was playing the most progressive music in the city at that time. I did not include colleges. All the colleges had their, you know, their concerts or presentations, whether it was museum school, Mass Art, Northeastern, Berkeley. I did not include Symphony Hall, although Chuck White would have wanted me to, because he sent me a great album cover of the Boston Pops done by Andy Warhol, and that didn't make the cut tonight. And I don't know what else I didn't include. I think there were probably some other. I didn't really do much talk about jazz, you know, even though there was a pretty good little jazz scene going on in and around Berkeley. You know, Rutland's Violins, which is across the street from Symphony Hall, was a pretty cool place for a long time. And I will just mention this concert here that took place at Matthews Arena. It was the Doors in 1970. They had to drag Jim Morrison off the stage. The first set he was totally coherent, and the second set he was totally inebriated. So they wanted to get him out of there real quick because he started swearing at, you know, everybody and police and whatnot. Oh, the other place too is this is the Dead Kennedys at Charles Gate Plaza, or what's that place called? It's Emerson, right? Charles Gate West there. You know, just when you get outside of Kenmore Square and heading into the back bay, there's one of the college spaces over there. Ted Kennedy's played there one night. You could see how many people were there. It was pretty epic event right around that time, because it really was one of the first hardcore shows in Boston. So starting with Kenmore Square, the psychedelic supermarket, which was over off of Com Ave, just when you get out of Kenmore Square, there was was that a Holiday Inn to the right there when you get past? Yeah, there was a Holiday Inn, and directly across the street on the other side, tucked away where the Nickelodeon cinema was a place called the Psychedelic Supermarket. And Miles Davis cut an album there, or he didn't cut an album, but many of the songs that appeared on an album came from a recording in that space. And also the Cream, in 1967, they turned around and put together their record. I guess it was an 8-day practice sort of space. And you know, some of the famous music, Sunshine of Your Love, everybody knows that song of Cream. And so this club was kind of like, I don't know, kind of the hippie place, would you say, David?
It was running concurrent with the Boston Tea Party, and there was kind of an intense competition for getting acts. Don Law had the Boston Tea Party, which was on East Berkeley, later to be relocated on Lansdowne Street, which is, the Tea Party was where the House of Blues is now. And as Duane said, it was, you know, name changes every couple of years, you know, after the Boston Tea Party, I can't remember if it was before or after, but, you know, there was a club called the Ark. The Mothers of Invention played there, among others. Subsequent to the Tea Party, it was dormant for a while, then it came back, as he said, 15 Lansdowne, then it was Boston, and so many name changes through the years, Metro, Avalon, now House of Blues. And actually, House of Blues is owned by Live Nation at this point, so Patrick and the Lions Brothers and the Lions Group have focused primarily on restaurants and bowling alleys as opposed to live music venues at this point. But a funny incident related to Psychedelic Supermarket was I had never been to Boston. My sister was a freshman here living at 700 Com Ave. I came to visit her in August of '67, and 700 Com Ave was the only building we knew, and we knew Kenmore Square. So we started walking, trying to figure out what to do that evening. And the Psychedelic Supermarket was midway between her dorm and Kenmore Square. And I gave her the choice. I said, we can go see this band at this club, or the thing that was unusual, Paul McCartney had done the first Outside Beatles project. He had written the theme song for a Haley Mills movie called Family Way, where she was pregnant and it was a big disturbance and all that. So anyhow, I said, what do you want to do? You want to see this group or do you want to see this movie? She picked the movie, and instead of seeing Cream for like $3, we saw some very dismissive movie with Haley Mills. But, you know, I did hear the thunder of Ginger Baker's drums, and I stood outside the door, you know, wanting to go in but deferring to myself. I never let her forget it either. So, but they did have, you know, a good run. The Psychedelic Supermarket, you know, was more rock oriented and more, as Duane said, kind of hippie, whereas the Unicorn was more blues related. And as a matter of fact, sometime for an extended period of time, when they kind of weren't doing as well as they should have or could have been doing, they would just have on the marquee, tonight, blues. And they didn't even identify who the performer was. I mean, George Papadopoulos, the owner of the Psychedelic Supermarket Unicorn, was notorious for you know, he would put the name of the band and then the price of the tickets. And then he was notorious that if he was doing some great walk-up, he would change the price upward on the marquee on the same day. So he left town with his tail between his legs, and probably, I don't think he's ever been heard from since. But, and he also used the Boston Arena to do a a kind of a pop festival on the heels of Woodstock. But, you know, the concept of a festival being indoors in the Boston Arena was total antithesis of what a festival was in those days, so. But it was a great show. It was like, I can remember that Buddy Miles was there, Al Cooper, The Crazy World of Arthur Brown, Mike Bloomfield, and I was there.
Incidentally, the Boston Arena was designed by the same guy who designed the Hotel Madison and the Boston Garden. So he was one of the first people to refrigerate indoor arenas. So we moved to Kenmore Square, and probably one of the more famous places besides the Rat is the Kenmore Club. And the Kenmore Club was made up of, at least in my day, when Lucifer started in 1969, and Katie started in 1970. Katie's was the place that I would go because it was more young people, although they did serve watered down beer, which was kind of strange. You know, but nobody complained because there were so many underage people in there, you know, that would kibosh everything. But, you know, the Kenmore Club was made up of 3 clubs, Lucifer's, Katie's, and Yesterday. And you can see the picture on the left is the crowd that would go to Lucifer's. Everybody's got sport coats on and ties and, you know, short hair. And then, you know, Katie's, which is on the right there, you know, it's kind of a young college crowd. Everybody's hair's a little bit longer, a little bit more casual. And then a couple of ads from, you know, these are some of the bands that would have played at the Katie's or at the Lucifer. Bobby Rydell, you know, Mickey Larry and the Exciters. This Tower of Power, Kevin, you gotta go on to that one. That's Live at Katie's, did that record. Then, this is the big one. This is Katie's with Aerosmith. You can see the ad there, lower right. That's what the outside of Lucifer looked like. Right over here, I don't know if people remember the Eugene Fair, but if you worked at a club, that's where you ended up at the end of the night, right? Everybody's going.
And on the corner to the other side of the Aegean was the New England Music City retail store. And that was part of a chain of stores. It was called New England Music City, and then there was a subset, other stores called Cheap Thrills. And there were, I think at their peak, there were maybe 7 or 8 of them around the city.
Do you remember Golden Joe Baker?
Oh yeah, he was the oldies guy, yeah. I mean, the interesting thing about the whole Kenmore Club strategy was that they would have different themes in each of the rooms. So, you know, they were, sometimes it was, you know, disco oriented, sometimes it was more pop, sometimes it was more oldies, depending on which venue you went to. And it's when you put up there, I think there were 6 different names throughout the 70s. And of course, there was significant conflict between the people who went to the Rat, the people who went to Fenway Park for the ball games, and the people who went to the Kenmore Club. And there were many times, you know, dust-ups and brawls happening right there in the middle of the street. People were not getting along with each other.
And remember, the Red Sox hadn't won a championship.
Yeah. So it was, you know, 70 years of pent-up fury.
And this was Marilyn Chambers playing at Lucifer. You gotta love that one.
Okay.
And then
when that news broke that she was in a porn film that was, you know, playing at all the major theaters, and she was revealed to have also been a model who appeared on a box of ivory snow, and she was holding a little baby, and it's this, you know, Midwestern purity, you know, beauty and the whole deal. And of course, you know, it was, you know, Procter and Gamble or Bieber Brothers, whoever had ivory, immediately withdrew it, and of course I had to go out and get a box of it for preservation because it was disappearing as I, you know. I do have that, yeah.
Gotta love it. And Narcissus was what Lucifer became. That was the next iteration. This next slide, which I found really interesting, is Celebration, which is what Katie's became. And, you know, some of the bands that would play there, like Natural Acts and G.G. Allen and the Cramps, pretty progressive when you think about it. But I think a lot of these bands, nobody wanted to let them play in their joint, or there wasn't, you know, an open date, so they would take whatever they could get, and they'd play some of these places that were almost out of business in a lot of ways.
Well, it was also, you know, in its own way, a competitive environment for the Rat, which was across the street. You know, I mean, the Rat kind of came into its heyday during that whole punk movement. I think the Rat started presenting live music from about '74, and they lasted until '97. But in that period, you know, probably '76, '77 until into the late '80s, that was a preeminent club where not only for local bands, but national, international bands. I mean, I was here one night when the Police were playing there, and they did their own load-in. They didn't even have, you know, a crew to bring their speakers and the instruments in. You know, there was a back door, there was a parking lot where there legitimately were many rats. And, you know, and there's nothing more horrifying than you're there in the back parking lot of the Rat, and there's snow on the ground, and you see these behemoth rats. You think you could put a saddle on them, they're that big. So, but the Police, you know, lifted their own gear, played the set. I remember once seeing Talking Heads at the Rat, and no lie, there were more people on stage than there were in the audience. It was me and 2 friends and 4 people on the stage, Talking Heads. So, you know, those are, you know, moments that you can't buy, you can't replicate. You know, you either were there or you missed it.
One of the highlights of the Rat was the Rock and Roll Rumble. This is 1980, I believe this was the last year, right, David?
Yeah, it moved over to the Paradise and various other clubs. Yeah, Middle East.
And that's, and that person there is Peter Wolf in the foreground. Now, Peter was the first DJ on BCM, is that correct?
He was one of, you know, he had the, I mean, there were probably, I think the first one to go on the air was Joe Rogers, Mississippi, Harold Wilson, Mississippi Fats. He had all these different air names, but he went on the air at 10 o'clock on March 15th, 1968, and played was I Feel Free by Cream, and that was the launch of the FM station at that point. But Peter was one of the first half dozen DJs. They actually started out, they weren't going full cycle 24 hours a day. The methodology was, give us your worst time, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and if we can sell ads and make money, because the station had a classical format and was kind of dying on the vine and not making any money. So they went to the owners and said, if we can make you money on the worst time, think what we can do with your best time. And so Peter was doing the late night shift. I think he was doing from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. And he reached a decision-making intersect where he had to decide, am I going to concentrate on my band? You know, he had originally been in the Hallucinations, and then that morphed into the Jay Giles band. And he had to give up the radio career within the first year of BCN. But yeah, he was there at the beginning.
These are some of the other bands that played there. The Freeze, for those of you who were into the really hardcore punk. It was 1982. This is GBH, 1983. These are all film and flash photos. And then another GBH one. Chuck White, who works for the archives. Did he make this, or is this something?
He and I made it together.
Oh,
we were
okay.
just we were doing a punk collage, you know, with a kind of orientation towards the Rat. And those are the artifacts, you know, tip of the iceberg of the kind of things that we do for installations or for graphic purposes. So we did this, it took us maybe a day, you know, just to retrieve items and then put them together in a collage format. Yeah, that's Chuck
Chuck not on the table and photograph.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
cool.
And Chuck has been with me as friends for probably 40 years, and he's been in various bands. He actually booked Green Street Station in Jamaica Plain, where they had Nirvana playing in a club environment in 1989. So I call him the vice president of logistics because he can do far more things than I can do. Like, you know, we are, you know, very complementary towards each other's abilities. And, you know, we do installations at the Wang, at the Cabot in Beverly. We did something with Tenderonis on Boston Street, the restaurant. But yeah, we did that just to show that we had the goods. Sometimes we do these projects just for the fun of doing them, to extricate content and have everything thematically related.
This 1983 photo from the RAD is the fall. And then we move over to Storyville, which is, what's the Westminster Hotel? And what did it become after that? Uno Pizza, was it Uno Pizza?
No, it was it wasn't the Westminster, it was the Buckminster. Yeah. And then it was an Uno's Pizza place, and yeah. I mean, that's the thing, some of these places you blink and they're gone, you know, and some lasted and, you know.
And this was 82 to 84.
Yeah.
So 2 years, you know, if it came half year, it could have been 12 months that they were open.
Yeah. But that was a throwback to, like, I think George Wein had Storyville before that, like in the
30s and 40s.
well, I think more like the 50s and 60s, yeah.
Moving over to Lansdowne Street. This is, like I said, this could be a presentation in itself, so get ready to put on your running shoes. You know, you got Oliver's, which is the cask and flagon on the corner. These are some of the bands that played there, Graham Parsons and Bruce Springsteen, starting, you know, 1960s. You had Oliver's, and then 69, the cask and flagon had started operating. I walked by there tonight, it was pretty exciting to walk by there. I hadn't been by in a few years, so.
The thing that's remarkable about the Springsteen was that during the year 1973, when he had his, you know, initial Columbia Records out, that he almost had 3 residencies at the venue. Because I think that it was in March, he did like 6 consecutive nights, and then August he did, I think, 7, and then I think in October he did 4. So in the course of that year, he was just, you know, almost calling, you know, that place a second home. And when you look at these, you know, fill and flash photos, and you look at these clubs, you really begin to appreciate the connectivity that the audience has with the performers. You know, there's this, you know, the proximity that you have is incredible. You know, you can pick your position in the venue. You want to stand stage left, stand stage right. You want to be almost touching the performers. You can. You know, it's a wonderful sensation to be in the midst of the performers. And Phil was such a great photographer. You know, I sometimes describe him as having razor blades on his elbows to just fight through the crowd and get the shot. And he was not timid at all. He's got a great body of work. 15
Lansdowne Street. Now there's the Ark, 1969. The Boston Tea Party moved in to sort of merge with the Ark. And then after the Tea Party went out, Cabaret After Dark. And then 15 Lansdowne Street, Boston, Metro City, Avalon. And we're at the House of Blues now. But the Ark was interesting. I'm gonna sort of, I'll let David tell a couple of stories, but it seems like the Grateful Dead was more like the style of the place,
Yeah.
because they had 3 rooms, but they would also come on stage with like theatrical performances, and that sounded pretty interesting. But when we get to the next slide, you'll see that these 3 rooms sort of like became things later on, that when 15 Lansdowne Street opened up, they had the, they used to make crepes in the place. And then they had like a back room that would be like an after-hours club, and you actually had to belong to the club to get into the after-hours club. Later on, that club would become Spit, Axis, and for a brief moment, DV8, where they sort of gravitated back toward the artsy stuff. And we'll have a couple of pictures of that. This is the Grateful Dead playing at the Arc, and our BQ. I don't know any of these other bands. Jimmy Willis. And this is the merger, so this is when the Boston Tea Party and the Arc sort of, David, is that actually what happened, that the two businesses became one business?
Well, I think what happened was for, I guess for growth, the Tea Party, which was originally started in 1967, it was on East Berkeley Street, moved over to Lansdowne Street. And that was really, that whole area was Desolation Road, nothing was going on there. But, they had the cavernous open space to do events and shows. And so, that's where I think they didn't merge so much as the Tea Party just kind of took over the space. I don't think the Arc was making it financially. And, then the events that took place at this Lansdowne Street location for the performers, you would have a Thursday, Friday, Saturday booking. And sometimes if it was a really exceptional band like Led Zeppelin, you'd get a fourth night in there. But generally, the Thursday was almost like a dress rehearsal or a throwaway night. And no lie, I had just started as a music director at WBUR in the fall of 1970. And there was a new performer who was coming in. There were raves from California that he had done some great club sets, and his name was Elton John. And I went there on Thursday night. Like I say, it was almost like, get comfortable with the club for the performer. And I'm not lying, if there were 60 people in the room, I'm being generous. And then he did the Friday and Saturday and did well. And of course, there were so many performers that were playing at the Boston Tea Party at that point. It was part of almost national, interconnected club environment. I think there were about 8 big cities that all had similar clubs. Kinetic Playground, and I think that was in Chicago. And there was the Electric Circus. Of course, there were the Fillmores that Bill Graham had, East and West. And the Tea Party was part of that. And what happened was that Don Law kind of took these acts, booked them into the Boston Tea Party, and by 1969, 1970, he was escalating that if a group a performer did particularly well at the Tea Party, then they'd move up and play, a bigger venue. For a while there, before Berkeley, took over the Berkeley Performance Center, there was a place called the Fenway that was, a concert hall. And then, of course, in 71, Don took a 99-year lease on the Orpheum. So there was a logical step up that as you succeeded and you filled the Tea Party, then you would graduate to a bigger venue all the way up to and including the Boston Garden. And in those days, the grass and the field at Fenway Park was sacred ground, so there were no shows there. I think I saw one show there probably in maybe 73, 74, that was, I think it was Ray Charles, and that was some kind of charity, some kind of benefit, might have been for the Jimmy Fund or something like that. But there were no concerts, nothing like now when you have anywhere from 10 to 15 concerts per summer season.
Or football games.
Yeah.
Patriots played it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the Patriots played anywhere that they could find a field. I think they played at BU's.
I had mentioned before the Arc had 3 rooms. It was a larger venue, could hold 1,700 people, whereas I think the original Tea Party was like 500, so as David said, it was a step up to a larger venue. And then the graduation from there was to the Orpheum. The theater group was called The Proposition, and one of the performers was Jane Curtin from Saturday Night Live, who was a student at BU, or I think she was either at BU or Northeastern. She dropped out to pursue an acting career. David, can you talk a little bit about the room that BCN started in?
Right, and well, that was the original Boston Tea Party, and that was kind of in a back room where they would do a live broadcast from the club itself. BCN's actual studios, the main studios, were at 171 Newbury Street. And that's where the classical music was presented, and that's where, you know, the broadcast facilities were. But they set up a satellite location at the Tea Party, and that allowed them to interview the performers who were playing at the original Tea Party, whether it was the Allman Brothers or, you know, Grateful Dead or anyone else. You know, it was just, you know, you took 12 steps and you were right there on the air right after a performance. Later on, when the station proved to be successful and it adopted a 24-hour underground rock format, the move was made to 312 Stewart Street. And you can even still see the location now. If you drive down Stewart, there's a neon sign that says Flashes. And that used to be a restaurant that was right downstairs at WBCN. And that's where just so many people took the elevator up to the 3rd floor. Charles Lacodera tells the story in about 1969. This is how casual it was that both the Dead and the Allman Brothers had separate gigs in town. And Duane Allman and Jerry Garcia rang them up on the air and asked if they could come up and sing and play. And of course, the door was open for them. But it was, you know, that was the era when I think the Greyhound bus station was kind of diagonally across the street there. And, you know, just, you know, it's great that there are photographs. It's great that there's all kinds of internet content for all of this. But it was a magical, scruffy time, no question. And, yeah, well, I mean, just BCN stayed there until I think '73, when the owner, T. Mitchell Hastings, decided that he needed a more fancy address and that he wanted to court advertising agencies and get more dollars in revenue. So the station moved to the 50th floor of the Prudential and was there until 1980, at which point it moved over to 1265 Wilson Street.
These are some of the bands that played there. Frank Zappa, Grateful Dead, The Who, and then in 1970 they shuttered and the Cabaret takes over. And this sign, for you guys that are into collecting, sold for $20 at an auction. But this was the sign that would light up to let people know that there was a show going on in the other room. So you had the big room where there was a concert and disco, and then the other room is where there was would be events like plays or shows, whatever, cabaret type shows. 15 Lansdowne Street. Unfortunately, because there were no cell phones, there's not a lot of pictures around. Although I got to, one of my neighbors upstairs, Jason Gabon, who's a photographer, and I'm sure he has pictures. I got to wrangle him to get his archive so we can give a little bit more complete idea of what 15 Lansdowne Street. I started working there in 1975, just shortly after the place opened up. And it was predominantly a gay disco that was changing over. A lot of people were coming into the suburbs because it had the best light show, the best sound system, the best music, the best dancing. They had male strippers. They had guys running around in basketball outfits, satin jackets, and it was just the place to come. And you know, I worked the door there with John Tassi, who stayed on later and worked for Boston and City, Avalon, Spit, all the other clubs. And this is just a little description from a New York Times article about the what was going on in the discos at the time. And this was an article that was written about Steve Rubell and his partner who opened up Studio 54. But they were also partners at 15 Lansdowne Street with a guy by the name of John Addison and another background investor by the name of Fifi. I never even got to know her, what her last name was.
So she wasn't a burlesque dancer?
No, she was like, I thought she was the money behind everything. That's how it seemed.
Well, when it became Boston, it was kind of parallel trajectory to the club that they had in New York, which was New York. And they tried to continue that sensibility in the Boston area.
And in 1977, it switched over, as David said, called Boston, and it ran until 1980, and then John Lyons he's the guy on the left of Eddie Murphy, and that's Seth Greenberg on the right of Eddie Murphy.
Well, Seth is, I'm looking to the left, and Patrick Lyons is to the right.
Patrick's got the glasses
Yeah.
on, and everybody knows this guy here. That's Prince. That was a big show at legendary show at Metro. This is the membership card. There's John Tassi. If you had one of these cards, you'd probably get in for free.
Tassi was it was well known that he was the fixer of everything that needed to be fixed. And I don't mean like the lock on the door. It was like the police and the licensing and everything that, the wheels needed to be greased. Tassi was the man.
And then Spit opened up in 1981. And again, you can see John Tassi's name at the bottom of the Spit card. And that ran from 1980 to 1987. This is Iggy Pop playing.
And Spit was meant to be more of a kind of punk alternative to the more mainstream acts we were playing in the bigger rooms. And, once again, competitive a bit to the Rat, probably had Spit and the whole Lions group had more muscle than Jim Harold did at the Rat. Jim was kind of, autonomous and acting independently, whereas the Lions group had multiple clubs that they could work with the agents and managers and the performers. And, the same way that you move up the pecking order, you could do a gig at Spit and then you could move on to a bigger one right there adjacent. You go from Spit to Axis to Avalon and do the accompanying increased business.
There's some of the fashions of the time. Actually, this was a fashion show at Spit, captured by Film Flash. And I think, one of the things about that location is people certainly like to take their clothes off and dress pretty scantily clad, which, And then anarchy came. This is the first iteration of Black Flag with Descadena singing vocals. And they played Spit. I think shortly thereafter, these are the different clubs, City. This is what DV8 looked like. This is an art show. I lived in this artist studio for 7 years. Her name's Paula Savarino, and she had a show here, and they really decorated the place with these big paintings, and they actually had an artist opening. That's Paula in the forefront on the left, and Jerry Bergstein on the right. I think there's a couple other familiar faces in the background.
The Bruce Henderson?
Bruce Henderson, that's, I can never remember his name.
I think the thing that's really important, in the 70s into the 80s was there, to kind of quote a Beatles song, I am you and you are me and we were all together. There was so much harmony of demographics and people in relative positions, the club owners, the record record company people, the promotion people, the media, you know, the Phoenix, the Real Paper, Boston Rock, the retail operations, Newbury Comics, the customers, the concert goers. Everyone knew everyone else, and it was this kind of great, you know, convergence of harmony, and it lasted for a good period of time. Everybody kind of grew up to the beat.
People actually got out and went places. You had to go places because there was no social media, there was no
Right.
Online, so communication was person to person. I love this poster in the middle. This is Joey Mars, one of my favorite local artists. And Lemonheads, and you've got this sort of Boston Tea Party reunion at Metro. These two posters Chuck sent over.
Well, the middle one with the Lemonheads was a Privet series on Lansdowne Street in 1991. Chuck produced a series of concerts sponsored by Privet and involved with the Boston Phoenix as a kind of media sponsor and WFNX. And Joey had, I think it was 5 or 6 different posters for every event throughout the course of the summer of '91. And the thing that's really fascinating to note is fifth bill there is Pearl Jam. And that's how low on the totem pole they were at that point. They were just kind of a baby band that was coming through town. Lemonheads were headlining. But, that's another tip of the hat to Chuck for what he did, 30 plus years ago. Just, having a perspective and an insight to up and coming talent.
Some of the other bands that played, Avalon, the Ramones, Iron Maiden, pretty big acts. And then we move into 9 Lansdowne Street. Let's talk about anarchy. You got Black Flag, Bad Brains, Flipper, SSD Control, which was a local hardcore band, and then the Dead Kennedys back again. Out of all those bands, for me, hands down, Bad Brains is the most energetic and most, I don't think anybody will dispute they're probably the best hardcore band ever.
And tonight, actually, I was talking to Chuck White earlier in the day. He and a couple other people from the archives are going up to the Cabot Theater in Beverly. Henry Rollins is playing tonight.
There you go.
So nobody ever goes away.
No. Then you had Venus de Milo, Mamakins, Karma Club, and Jake Ivers in that little stretch of area from, where Spit was down to almost the corner. And this is kind of what the scene was like at Venus de Milo. Again, another sort of disco, crossover type disco. And then you have Bill's Bar there, and how did the Freeze get to play at Bill's Bar?
Hail Mary Desperation. Bill's Bar was actually a neon sign for a place called Bill's Bar on Mass Ave. And I think that the Lions group bought it because it was going to be just taken down and destroyed, and they relocated it to Lansdowne Street. And the slide before, the reference to Mamakin, that was a club that was kind of done in conjunction with the Lions group and Aerosmith. And of course, everybody thought, well, Aerosmith's going to be hanging out here and be able to, have a conversation at the bar with Steven Tyler and Joe Perry. That didn't really happen, and I think that, people's expectations were kind of let down considerably because Aerosmith was touring and, they wanted their own club. I don't know if initially they envisioned it as their little sandbox retreat to hang out, but, it didn't turn out that way, and I think it had a relatively short life.
And this corner here, where I think, what's it called, Lucky Strikes Lanes, Jillian's, and before that it was Spin-Off Disco, roller disco. Anybody go to Spin-Off?
Once.
I love skating, and the music was great. It was a different experience altogether, like right downtown, which, if you wanted to go I grew up in Medford, so, you know, we had the Ballaroo, but there were, Shabu over in Blue Hill Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't usually go there, but, those were the only places to go skate, so. And then the street, obviously, you know, where the hat show is. But this was a great place, and they put on great theme parties there. And,
Did you know Michael Cohen, who came up with the concept and ran the place?
no,
Yeah, I just ran into him. He and his wife started a big advertising agency. They used to do all the Jordan's furniture ads, and they, you know, were quite successful. And ultimately, when they retired, they sold their agency back to the employees. I think it's still in function. Yeah, but yeah, that was a period. You know, I think that you know, wasn't Raquel Lush did a kind of roller derby movie.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a fad that, you know, had its moment.
And then we have Boylston Street. And we'll start down at the Catacombs, because that's probably the oldest place. That's right next to Stevie's Pizza, where the Boston Film and Video Foundation was for a number of years. This building is a really cool building. I looked, when we left, we closed down Gallery East on East Street over by South Station. The leather district was becoming, you know, sort of developed. And that building, the top floor was empty. It's kind of like a lot of little funky configurations on the roof, but there were so many windows and skylights that we figured the place would be a sieve and leak, so we never ended up renting there. But this club was a place where Jay Giles, I believe, started out playing, right?
Yeah. And actually, I have in the lobby of the Burb Hotel a flyer from when Van Morrison played there. And for some reason, he was in between Brown Eyed Girl and making Asper Weeks, and he was living in Boston. He was actually living in Cambridge. And Ryan Walsh did a book. First it was a Boston Magazine article, and then he did a book about Van's time in Cambridge, and then the whole music and media scene in the Boston area during that late 60s period. I think it was 1968 specifically. But the flyer that's on the wall at the Burb for some reason, Van didn't just go out under his own name. The name of the group was the Van Morrison Controversy. And oh, there it is.
Chuck sent this one.
Yeah, okay, great. And the person who was running that is a friend of Chuck's and mine, a guy named Peter Casperson, who currently manages people like Ani DeFranco. So, you know, relationships that were forged 30, 40, 50 years ago still prevail today. I often say that the places where we worked, the companies are long gone, but the people still retain the relationships, and that kind of transcends time.
This is Boston Film and Video Foundation, and a lot of interesting people over the years were involved with them. One person that comes to mind is Pat Hearn, who had a band called Bomb and Gag back in the 1980s, early 80s, late 70s. These are some of the shows that they had there, or recordings. They probably had some pretty sophisticated recording equipment. You know, they had a studio there, so some of these bands actually recorded there as well. Then moving across the Fenway, we have the 1270. Okay, and the 1270 was the place you went to go hear Jimmy Stewart. You know, who's this guy right standing there. He ended up moving to New York and had like a super high profile job as a disc jockey, and he got killed in one of the fire in a bathhouse. And but when he was in Boston at the 1270, it was like the chatter in the club was, you going to 12, you're going to 12, you're going to 12 to listen to Jimmy Stewart. And that's why people went there.
And that's when, you know, DJs really started to become go-to celebrities unto themselves. It was no longer just, you know, who's the performer. The DJ became the performer, and working the turntables and, you know, creating a whole musical sensibility that was unique to a specific club or specific spinner.
Yeah, it's like nowadays, you pay more to go hear a DJ than you do to go see live music. It's like incredible, like down in the Seaport, they have these clubs there that, you know, they'll have guest DJs and you have to pay, like, according to their popularity. So one DJ might be $40, another might be $100.
And that, you know, opportunity's been filled by an organization that's, you know, kind of subsequent to the Lions Group. It's Big Night Entertainment, and they've got venues various places around town. They have one venue right next to the Boston Garden. There's another one, like you said, in the Seaport.
And then 1270 became Maximum Security, Tattoo, Quest, and then finally the Baseball Tavern. And here's a couple of posters from the Baseball Tavern. Chuck sent these over, Iron Cross. Love it.
And the thing that's remarkable to this day is if you walk down streets, especially Alston, Brighton, or Cambridge, or Somerville, there's a very thriving arts world of creating posters. And, you know, it's like, obviously they succumb to the weather and, you know, to people who will take them off or, you know, write graffiti on them. But, you know, it's you know, if you keep up with it, it's almost like a wonderful time capsule of our times.
Another club was the Ramrod, which was next to the 1270 at 1254. That would later become Machine, which was another gay, these were two gay clubs. Machine was kind of interesting because they also had a fetish night there, which I ended up going to with my daughter. It's kind of funny how we ended up there. You know.
And her urging.
Yeah. And then there was McNasty's and Jumpin' Jack Flash, which would become Church. Another venue that the Bad Brains played out. This was a great bill. I was at this show. Bad Brains, Negative FX, Gangrene. And you can see in the hardcore shows were a little bit different than your typical show. I mean, the fans would get up on stage and sing the songs with the lead singer. Unless it was Rollins, then he'd probably punch somebody. But, you know, for the most part, bands like Minor Threat, this is you know, the guy with the skinhead, he's in Negative FX. He got up there and sang with HR, who you can't see in the background. The odd thing was, Bad Brains were an all-black band, and they're playing to a predominantly white audience. And, you know, they came from DC, they played like, you know, they were all accomplished musicians, where most of the bands that were playing in hardcore music could barely play their instruments. So, you know, and I think a lot of the bands aspired to play heavy metal, but they weren't good enough to play heavy metal, so they ended up with this sort of like garage-y type sound, which became hardcore.
Gangrene, actually, Chris Doherty, the lead singer, had a stroke a number of years ago, and to show you the sense of music community, a couple of years ago, there was a big reunion and benefit concert at the Paradise, raised a lot of money for him, and I saw him about 6 months ago. He came up to the archives, and he's mobile and he's got some impairment, but you know, it just shows you that you know, I think Gangrene won the Rock and Roll Rumble in something like 1987, 1988, and you know, when you think back, that's, you know, 35 years ago, and there's still people who are active on the scene and supportive of one another, and some are obviously still making music. This
Guy in the front there is Dickie Barrett, if anybody's heard the Mighty Boss Tones. He's the lead singer. He's also on, well, has had stints on Jimmy Kimmel as the band leader there. But this is, you know, like I said, predominantly white male. I loved, what's his name there? Guy that owns Newbury Comics.
Mike Dries.
Mike Dries. We interviewed him, and he's talking about, describing hardcore.
Yeah.
You know, what the pit was like. And then it became Jumpin' Jack Flash, and You know, so these are some of the other bands that played there. Lou Miami, you know, famous local band. Let me just run down the list. Sleep Chamber. Sleep Chamber would end up moving over to become the house band over at the, it's a place over in Cambridge. Help me out. It just reopened.
Man Ray.
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing too, when you look at the lineup, so many of these bands put out their own albums. They didn't, you know, need the sanctioning of major labels. They put records out. I've got, you know, the section, God knows, this wide of just Boston bands that put out their records in that period of time. And you had, you know, major media giving them coverage as well. You know, that they would get, you know, sometimes cover stories, the Boston Phoenix, the Real Paper, BCN, COZ, stations would play them and not even ghettoize them in a Sunday night show that was just, you know, local Boston music. They would, you know, integrate it through the regular programming. Charles Laquadere would have a Big Mattress Song of the Week, get played 5 times in the mornings. Ken Shelton would have a lunchtime song, you know, that was a parody of something, but then, you know, would lead into a local song. And, you know, throughout the day, you were as likely to hear a local band as you were to hear, you know, major label acts. You don't have that anymore. You don't have, you know, well, you do have it left-hand side of the dial. You know, the radio stations like NBR, ZBC, ERS, UMB, those are, you know, great places to go if you want to log in your head who's doing what at any given time during the day or the week. And if you like a show, the great thing is, you know, with technology being what it is, you can go and visit the station's archives and you get like 2 weeks of saved programming, and you can listen to whatever you want at any time that's convenient for you.
What surprises me is some of the major players that were in radio that ended up at the college stations, you know, like Aldo.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and they still have great shows, you know, Chachi's at UMass, Aldo's at UMass. You know, Joni's still at MIT.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of great college radio in Boston. I think that's how a lot of young bands get their material out there. Because, you know, yeah, you can listen to it on the internet, but there's still some punch with hearing it in the air.
And they're putting it in context, and, you know, they're giving you a little insight and a backstory about the performers themselves. And, yeah, it's really, you know, still kind of excellent if you're willing to give it the time and the attention.
So if you want to see David's archives, you can go across the street to the Burke Hotel, and I think they've got quite a bit of stuff over there, right?
Yeah. Well,
can people visit your archive down in?
only by appointment. It's not open to the public. It's not like a Hall of Fame or a, you know, museum or anything. But somebody could twist my arm and I'd open the doors.
I've created an archive at the West End Museum, and when I walked, you know, our archive is like a little room this big. When you walk through his place, your mouth is open like wide, and you're just seeing things that, you know, wow, you didn't even know existed. So that's the type of place it is.
I sometimes get surprised myself because, you know, I save things for not only years, for decades, but, you know, because I reached the point, I live in West Roxbury, and I couldn't live with my artifacts anymore, so I took space in a place in Avon, but it was industrial storage. So I would fill the boxes, and I didn't just throw everything in boxes and create time capsules. I would have about 40 or 50 categories going on simultaneously. So the t-shirts went in a t-shirt box, cassettes in a cassette box, 12-inch singles, and so forth and so on. And when I fill the boxes, then I would date them. So if it said 393 t-shirts, it was all the t-shirts that I had acquired in the weeks before March of '92, or 3 or whatever I said. But so when I had to leave the building in Avon because it was sold and a new owner wanted to reclaim the real estate, I was in a frenzy, in a panic, but I did get this place in Norwood, and I signed a 20-year lease. And opening the boxes now and putting things in retrieval systems and being able to have hands-on access and to work on projects has been my ultimate dream. And when I say that I touched these things maybe for 12 seconds and 32 years ago, I'm reacquainting myself with so many of my contents all over again. And it's been a fun, great experience. I'm, meeting people, surrounded by people who work with me, who are like-minded, and it all leads to this moment. So, and the Verb is a great outlet too. That was the first hand of God from the side of the stage that said, "Here's an opportunity." And Steve Samuels had the vision of preserving the Verb, and like I said, celebrating all the media and music and pop culture that came out of this neighborhood. And I was recommended to him by Stephen Mindich, who was the late owner of the Boston Phoenix, which was right around the corner here. And so all roads lead back to the Fenway, as far as I'm concerned. And I was talking to the general manager of the Verb, we had dinner a couple weeks ago, and I told him the light bulb went off. It's going to be 10 years in July since the Verb Hotel opened. And it's just remarkable to think that time is flying by when you're having fun. So, but we keep refreshing the installations. Some things are there permanently, but it's always worth just stopping in. All you have to do is tell the valet you want to check out. You've got relatives coming to town. You want to have a little look at the environment, and you walk in, you see the artifacts on the wall, then you walk down the corridor, and then there's the vitrine, the 60 linear foot display case, and then you keep walking. Obviously the individual rooms, you have to kind of take the room, pay the freight to be able to be in it. But I think there are 93 rooms in the Verb, and the intent is to do each room as an individual act. So I think we've got about 9 at this point, and we've expanded the original concept. So there is a Cars room, there is a J. Giles room, there's a Aerosmith room, but there's also Queen, Led Zeppelin, and The Who, Elton John, and on and on. So, but we want to. When I think of the people who aren't represented, whether it's Prince or Bob Dylan, there isn't even a Beatles room at this point. There is a Stones room. So we've got a lot of things to do in the future.
Phil Flash says he wants a room.
He deserves it. You've seen the evidence of his quality work.
You're kind of interested when they for an interesting
Oh, yeah.
design to put this wallpaper.
But when it comes to the access, Brian Coleman, who's sitting over there, has done several books. Buy Me Boston, which is a great collection of ads that ran in a lot of the publications from around 1960s, 70s, 80s, even to the 90s. And he's gone to multiple sources for the advertisements in various Boston publications. But he's a great visionary conceptual artist who actualizes his concepts. And I'm happy to give somebody like Brian free rein in the archives. I'm not one of these mid-plus people where if you put a thumbprint on the shrink wrap, it debases the value. So Brian, you can use the archives as a resource for any project.
What was the last one, Brian? Tickets?
Yeah, I did ticket stubs,
Yeah.
not a book of that. But just-
Greeting cards, he created these greeting cards, the front of the card, and I think there's 10 different?
Yeah,
Each one has a collage of concert tickets from Boston venues. And they also created wrapping paper that if you were to frame that would be a work of art unto itself. And he's got a record store in Newton, Upper Falls called Wantless Records. I encourage everybody to check that out as well.
Questions? Mallory?
I'm so curious what you both think about the change of the state of archiving with cell phones. How now everybody can take a picture of anything, everything is accessible, there's such mass quantity of information and photographs and whatnot. Does that affect the work that you're doing, or that may be done in a similar vein in the future? And if so, how?
Well, we both collect material culture. So you're talking like digital culture, and it's a little different. you know, I'm having a hard time because we're doing $1.5 million renovation at the West End Museum. And our executive director is 26 years old and he's a gamer. So his whole mentality is digital, where my mentality is like David. You know, I've collected stuff and collected stuff and collected stuff over the years, and I like to go back and touch it every once in a while. And when I created the archive at the West End Museum, you know, it was great to start collecting things, you know, like political cards that people would give out when they were running for political office, or you know, we have a photograph of a couple of photographs of John F. Kennedy. You know, when he came, John F. Kennedy voted at Old West Church for himself as president. You know, and he came back from the war, the Second World War, and he belonged to the West End veterans. You know, so there's those kind of pictures. Nowadays, I'm constantly taking pictures of my granddaughters and putting them up on the internet, and taking pictures of interesting places that I go, and I archive them all digitally as well. But I think it's not quite the same, because unless you sit at the computer for like 8 hours, you don't always get into your archive like you would if you were physically walking through it. I think it's a little different.
And as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing like the real thing, you know, the tangible artifact. You know, I used to, you know, the places I worked, whether it's at BCN for 16 years or FNX in the Phoenix for 19, I had, you know, boxes next to people's trash cans saying, if you're going to put something in the trash, put it in the box, I'll come around weekly and claim it. Because I had that sense of preservation. But the idea was that probably 60-70% of what I have in my archives, my peers, my co-workers could have had. They just, you know, they were on to the next poster, the next trade magazine, the issue of Billboard or whatever. And with the passage of time, these things become consequential. And I think the thing that I, you know, maybe didn't stress enough in this conversation is that I don't just save music and pop culture and music artifacts. Like what Duane said about politics and food packaging and, you know, playing cards and postcards and matchbooks and artifacts from comic books and, you know, superheroes and everything under the sun. I like to kind of create a narrative that, you know, tells the story and connects the dots. And I think, yes, you could do that, and I'm sure that in the coming years that there will be digital archives that are of consequence as well. If it is the only fallback that you have, if the only way that you can see an image is on the phone because that was the only way it was captured, then you live with that. And I'm sure that you can print those out as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, that is an option. You could always print it out, but do you guys do that for posterity? Or does it just seem like it's coming too fast and furious?
Well, I mean, we printed, for example, some of these slides, you know, we printed out the rat punk collage. It would have been a little unwieldy to bring that in because it was, you know, obviously I don't use tape and I don't, you know, use glue to make sure that something stays on a canvas. But, you know, we did the layout and we shot it, and, you know, that is something that works in this environment, you know, is indicative of a moment in time. You know, that's supposed to represent late 80s, early 90s, the rap culture. But I think, you know, there was a couple of, maybe, 2-3 years ago, there was this whole NFT, you know, sensation of, you know, people are going to get a certificate of authenticity for something that doesn't exist, and, you know, you can hang that certificate on your bathroom wall and feel important. But, you know, that's kind of gone into the shadows again, retreated. Now, it may or may not become, so it seemed like it was a manipulated market to begin with.
Yeah, the values come way down for those NFTs.
Yeah.
Way down, yeah.
So, I think that, you know, there are opportunists in every situation, you know, people who make money by creating things, you know, there are, I follow the market. I don't sell anything. That's maybe the big qualifier that you should know, is that I acquire things, people make donations, I will buy things, but I don't sell anything. So I'm, you know, and I pay the freight and the overhead, and the people who work for me and work with me, and, you know, the rent and the utilities, you know, all the installations that I do go into this pocket and then wind up coming out of that pocket. So, but I believe in it, and I monitor the marketplace, and there's a company out of Dallas called Heritage Auctions, and they are the third biggest auction house in the world after Christie's and Sotheby's. And I watch how insane these prices have become for artifacts that people didn't even pay anything for. I mean, if you started collecting posters in the 60s or 70s, you went to a college dorm bulletin board, you went to a telephone pole, you went to maybe a club, you pried it off the wall, didn't cost anything, the event was over. That's my principle. If the event hasn't happened yet, I won't take it, but if it's 12:01 on the day that it happened, it's fair game. And, it's like, then you move on into the 70s and you go to these swap meets and, ballrooms of a Holiday Inn on a Sunday afternoon, and you see the posters, it didn't cost you anything, it's going for $5. And then 7 years later, it's going for $50. Then it's going for $500 at auction, and then you watch Heritage Auctions, and before you know it, posters are going for $5,000, $10,000, $20,000. It's insane, but it's no different, to me, the thing that's dismaying is that, starting because of COVID and going forward, that, concert tickets are just becoming a non-entity, and so there you go, back into your phone.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're in your phone, and you lose the tangible evidence of an event that you went to. So every event that I go to, I put in a folder. And anything, if it's got a, access, if it's got a bracelet, if it's got a laminate, if it's got a napkin celebrating the event, all that goes into a folder, so every event, and then I keep those separate, so if you were to come out to the archives, you'd see, 6 boxes about this size with nothing but tickets, sporting events, movie theater, screeners, invitations to screenings, as well as concerts, clubs, but that's a sad thing to see evaporating, as we speak, because, the tickets too have their own value in the collectible marketplace.
And all tickets, right? Like movie tickets,
Oh, yeah.
art show tickets, everything, it's not here anymore.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Did you buy the cabaret marquee? You said it sold for $20 on something,
The cabaret you signed, did you buy that?
No, $20 it sold for.
but it wasn't you two.
But I saw one
When did you buy it?
recently.
Yeah.
This is mind-boggling, that they're auctioning off an SSD control poster that's 8.5 by 11 that ran through copy cops for $60. It's like, I had one, I'll just run off like a boat.
Well, but there are the experts who will tell you, they'll evaluate the paper, the ink, all the nuances of anything. And there is a lot of fraudulent, bogus material out there. Years and years ago, I remember watching 60 Minutes, and they had a segment on sports collectibles, which I have as well, but not like a really crazy, fanatical sports collector. But they were talking about the astronomical prices, but they also had the parenthetical of the FBI saying that up to 70% of sports collectibles are bogus. They're counterfeit, they are not real. And Ted Williams, for example, once again, the Shadow of Fenway, Ted Williams' signature was very easy to duplicate. And you have to, it's almost like you need a photograph of you with Ted with a pen in his hand to verify that there is authenticity to his signature. And his son was very, very much guilty of almost like taking a hand and moving it, like a painful situation.
Question?
When did you work at WFNX? What years?
From '94 until it was sold in 2012.
Oh.
And then later, next year, 2013, you talk about these round number commemorative times, but in 2013, the Phoenix just abruptly closed down. So this is the 10th year since the Phoenix ceased to be. And like I said, the studio and the main activity was in Lynn, downtown Lynn in Central Square. But the offices, the whole, at one point, the Phoenix organization, known as the Phoenix Media Communications Group, had, I think, magazine stuff at night. There were radio stations in Portland, Portsmouth, Boston, and Rhode Island. There was a Worcester Phoenix, a Providence Phoenix, Boston Phoenix, of course, and there was an in-house art department, for outside projects. So it was quite a conglomerate. And then I think what happened with Stephen Mindich, who was the owner, the meltdown, the economic meltdown of 2008 came, and he got really hit badly on that. And then, as much as the Phoenix was in the forefront of technology, they were doing ringtones, signing up Metallica and Kiss and all the things that were going on, but they kind of missed a step after the meltdown and didn't see that, the migration of all the advertising dollars were going online, and they were slow to put the radio station online, slow to do advertising sales online. And I think Stephen just reached a point where he wanted to enjoy life. I worked with him after he closed the Phoenix down to transfer all the archives of Phoenix companies to Northeastern University, which at that point, it went into their library, and they have a category called Urban Studies that this became the largest collection that they acquired in that category. On the strength of that, a couple of years later, with the bragging rights of the whole Phoenix archives, they were able to acquire the whole Boston Globe photo collection, their archive of 1.2 million photographs. And so it's, one thing builds on another, logical segue. So, but yeah, it was devastating when the Phoenix closed because the issue was at the printer. And I can still distinctly remember that Thursday afternoon, Stephen came in, everybody was gathered, they didn't quite know why, because there was no, prelude to telling people that we're going down. And, a lot of the people were living paycheck to paycheck, and they just went into a frenzy that they needed to get another job by next Monday. It was pretty frightening. And, but all the bound volumes, and that was something that Stephen Mindich stipulated, he wanted the archives and the bound volumes and all the back issues of the Phoenix to be available to the public, not just for scholarly purposes. So I think if you made an appointment to go to the Snell Library at Northeastern, you call ahead, you could probably book a date and you'd be able to turn those pages and see what was, there too, from 1966 to 2013 was a time capsule.
I knew someone who worked there in the 80s, that's why I'm trying to track her down.
What?
That's why. What's that?
You trying to track down who?
Someone who worked there in the 80s.
Oh, well, if you were to go there, you just look at the mask of who was there. They listed every, usually it was like page 3 or page 5, and they had the whole listing of the sales side, the circulation side, the arts and entertainment, the political, the designated, job positions of everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Is it on a radio station? Or
Yes, that's radio station.
Oh, I'm actually going to Nashville with Julie Kramer, like next week. You know Julie Kramer, who was one of the DJs on FNX?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she's a good friend of my sister's. I'm going to Nashville, so give a name on top of that.
Oh,
Ask.
Yeah, Julie has been doing, she, was a photographer of some merit as well, and she always had her camera at the station in Lynn,
Yeah.
and she has great photos, there's a little diner in downtown Lynn, she's got, Red Hot Chili Peppers hanging out, just very casual. She's got Iggy Pop with his hands on the wheel of an automobile in front of the building, so, yeah, and she's had a couple of fine art shows and sold prints, and she's got some merch going on, the usual mugs and t-shirts and so forth with her images on them, but yeah, she's still actively engaged.
You got a question?
Yeah, so one of your early slides, you have a photo of Miles Davis riding his album cover. And you probably know this, he actually performed quite a few times at Paul's Mall and Jazz Workshop. And I'm just wondering if you guys ever collected any memorabilia from those two venues.
Oh,
I have a story like David's Talking Head story. We used to work out in the South End over on Columbus Ave in the early 70s. I think it was probably 1974. And we decided to go over to Copley Square and fell into Jazz Workshop. and there were probably 10 people in the place, and George Benson is playing guitar. He didn't sing at this point, you know. It was just, you know, George Benson and us. So,
Yeah,
you
it was
know,
a
you never
pretty,
know.
it was a pretty neat venue.
Yeah.
And you, like you said, you go in there and there'd be somebody like Miles Davis and there wouldn't be that many people in the room and you'd be like, wow.
I mean, the people
Really?
who I can testify that I saw range from Patti Smith,
Yeah.
Tom Petty, Bob Marley, where you could not see, I could not see you because of the smoke. That's how dense it was. And I do have, well, much akin to the flyers, and I don't think they did posters for the workshop in the mall, but they had little flyers and they had postcards. I've got lots of those. And I have part of a sign that was on the exterior of the building. It says, yeah, I'm trying to remember if it says, I think it says Paul's Mall.
Yeah.
But Fred Taylor, you know, continued his career as a jazz impresario at Scullers.
I think he left Scullers though.
He did,
I think he did.
not by choice either.
Yeah, not by choice, right?
He died about 4 years ago, something like that. I mean, I remember going to his birthday party, and he said, "It's so great that everybody has congregated to help me celebrate the 20th anniversary of my 70th birthday." And he was turning 90. But he was a great guy, and very much beloved. And I can remember standing in front of the Jazz Workshop, Paul's Mall. This was back in the probably early to mid 70s. And I'm talking with Fred and a guy named Joe McEwen, who was known on WBCN as Mr. C. And he did Mr. C's Rhythm and Blues Review, and he had a specialty show on BCN. He later went on to have a successful career as an A&R guy at Columbia Records, and later the Concrete Group, part of Universal Music. And we're standing there talking. It's a misty night. It's probably March, a night like this in a way. Cab pulls up. The guy gets out, puts his arms around Fred. Fred, so great to see you. It was Miles. You know, Miles just really, you know, loved Fred
Yeah,
Taylor.
yeah. That's great.
Any other questions?
I'm not sure if you mentioned, how do you both know each other?
Well, we know each other.
I think it's just
You know,
part of the
same
spirit of the
being
community.
Yeah, being there.
Yeah, yeah,
If you're there, I remember David when he had dark hair.
yeah.
Yeah.
He looked a lot younger.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that's another thing, you know, we've got photos and the evidence of who we're talking about from back then, you know, photos with everyone from Yoko Ono to Tiny Tim and everyone in between, and my hair was dark then, so, yeah. But no, I think that, you know, you just go to events and, you know, the social scene being what it is, you know, you meet somebody, you find that you're similarly inclined, your interests parallel, and like-minded people will ultimately find each other.
I did a show at the West End Museum. Nobody wanted to celebrate the 50-year anniversary of the Beatles. And so we somehow hooked up with Chachi, who has a Breakfast with the Beatles show. And then we started putting this idea together, and before you know it, it was a great event. It ran for 3 days. I think we did probably 12, 13 different, we did lectures, we brought in the guy who illustrated Yellow Submarine. There were these 3 guys who crashed the Beatles press conference in 1964, and they had all these pictures. So we set up the press table and had them behind the press table. And people, I think maybe like, I'd say 80% of the people who were in the audience had gone to that concert. You know, they were a little bit older at this stage, but they had attended the Beatles at the Boston Garden. So we've been talking to Chachi about doing it again.
Yeah, because next year is the 60th anniversary. And yeah, the old Boston Garden was right in your neighborhood. The hotel, what was it, the Brad?
Madison.
Oh, Madison, yeah.
Yeah.
Madison Hotel where they stayed. It was just, that was a great series of events.
You got a question?
Yeah, where do women fit into your archive, especially like punk bands, alternative? I know the 90s, they always were dominated by men bands.
I'm sorry, I can't
I'm
hear you.
curious where women bands, especially alternative punk, fit into your archives.
Yeah, you know, it's quite,
In the
it's,
90s, the airways were quite dominated. Biggest of the college stations have more.
I think in the alternative, you know, like, I'll call it hardcore because that's like, you know, the scene that would seem to be predominantly dominated by males, you know. There were, it's really interesting, I went to an event last week and it was put on by Nancy Burrell, who's married to Al Burrell from SSD Control. She used to put on concerts. That was her job, you know, and then there was, you know, other women who were involved in the scene who were taking photographs. We did the Boston hardcore film. It, you know, it played like a bunch of venues around the world, you know, film festivals. And then we met this woman, Angela Arangio, who comes and shows us a bunch of pictures that we would have loved to have when we made the film, but we didn't have them. So you never know who's in the audience taking photographs, because there were people with cameras, and they didn't develop their film until years later. Katie, the cleaning lady, who was you know, our producer for the film, she had a radio station, WERS. So everybody played a different role. I think it was a little different. It wasn't so corporate, you know, it wasn't organized probably like in the world that David was in. It was a little bit more corporate. You know, it was more like, you know, what do they call it when everybody gets together and builds a house? Barnstorming?
Fundraising.
Is that what it's called?
Fundraising.
Yeah, so it was more like, you know, everybody's contributing. So I don't think that anybody was ever excluded. I think it was, you know, maybe women were excluded from the pit because it was so violent. You know, I mean, people would get thrown on the ground and then 20 people would pig pile on them. I mean, if you were ever on the bottom of a pig pile, it's like crushing, literally crushing. So it got to be to the point where, you know, certain aspects were dominated by males, but other aspects, other jobs were, you know, taken up by women as well.
It was the same thing in the media, you know, when I was at WBCN, you know, Tammy Heidi was the DJ, Lisa Traxler was the DJ, Catherine Lauren, you know, they had major shifts just like Charles Laguerre, Ken Sheldon, and Mark Parento. And same thing, I think, you know, in terms of music, you know, there's a woman who still produces shows, J.J. Gonson, who was a great photographer. She had a place on Highland Ave in Somerville for years called Once Ballroom. She's still doing shows at various venues, the Crystal Ballroom adjacent to the Somerville Theater. You know, she is, you know, I've managed to run interference for some of her photographs being placed. There's a great one of Kurt Cobain that's in one of the trailers, the new trailers of the Verve. I've got, you know, I mean, BCN especially, certainly FNX in the Phoenix as well, but, you know, BCN was this halcyon period where everybody came through, and, you know, the Joan Jets and just on and on and on. There was such, you know, I can remember walking through the corridors and this woman is just wandering aimlessly, and she was kind of looking for her promotion person contacted. It was Sinead O'Connor, and she was touring behind her first album. And we had a totally open door policy at BCN. I mean, you never almost weren't certain from day to day who was going to come in through the door, but I can remember one day in particular, we had Jimmy Carter came in with full security because he was promoting a book, and David Byrne came in the same week that he was on the cover of Time magazine as a Renaissance man because he was involved with a show at the old ICA on Boylston Street, and Mary Wilson from the Supremes came by. She also had the first of her 3 memoirs. So, you know, we were completely open to anyone who had a story to tell, a project to promote, and the same thing at the Phoenix. If you know, were to look at the cover stories of not only who the writers were, but who the subjects were. It was very evenly balanced, men and women. And same thing, I've got, we sometimes do installations just for the fun because similar things start emerging from different piles, and then we'll do, 50 years of hip hop celebration, but we'll just, do it at the archives. It doesn't go anywhere. And we've done that for women, we've done that for politics, and, I like to think of myself as one-stop shopping for any subject that you want. But I don't think the women get any shortness of attention.
Right?
I guess David and Duane too, I'm curious, do you have one category of artifact that you find most interesting and challenging to collect? Because, I think the one that you're talking about, the posters and flyers, how expensive they've gotten, but they were never meant to last more than a week. So that's, if you can find a mint poster from a telephone pole, which David knows all about, then there's a reason if it's still mint, why it might be worth a lot of money. You know what I mean? So what are some of your kind of categories that most people don't really think about?
Well, I don't think you can find a mint copy of a poster on the street. The only way that I think you really find a mint copy is if it came almost directly from the printer, or if somebody wasn't doing their assignment of taking these posters and putting them on the street.
They actually, in the late 1800s, the Art Nouveau movement, there was something called Maitre de l'Affiche, and it was a collection of posters that were out in the street, but you had to subscribe to it, and it's a limited edition. I collect them, that's why I know about them. So the big posters that would be on the street would be this, and they wallpaper paste them up, and they were lithographs, but they were cheap quality. The subscription that you would get would be like high quality paper, and they were done by all the famous artists, Mucha, Lautrec, Jules Charest, just everybody who was a graphic artist at the time. So for I don't know if I interrupted you.
No, but even, Duane brings up an interesting point that, if these things are glued and affixed to an abandoned storefront window or a wall, you can't pry those off. You can't save those. That's an impossibility in any condition. But, the other posters, you're gonna have to coexist with the Scotch tape, you're gonna have to coexist with the, push pins, the little holes in the corners, but I'm not a perfectionist in that sense. I respect and appreciate people who want that kind of perfection, but I'll live with something just as it is. The one area that I'm kind of looking forward to taking the challenge of is my photos collection. Because I probably got 10 to 20,000 photographs. And that's probably separate from the promotional photos that the record companies and the movie companies and the book publishers all put out. These are like, abandoned photos, from local publications where they just gave up the ghost or they were gonna throw them away. But these were used for editorial purposes. And when you see some of the photographers, what they became, who they became, how important they became, what was chronicled in a particular time period by these people who had the eye. And there's a handful, and Brian knows this, photographers who have given up the ghost and abandoned their work. We both appreciate a guy named Flynn Bourne who, threw away all his work. I think that photographers are probably one of the most, bedeviled and beaten down categories of artists. People, when I could show you photos, a beautiful 8x10, and you see the crop marks of how someone editorial determined that this photo doesn't make the cut for the space, and they totally compromise the image. Getting paid, the rights factor of how long do you own your image, and is it the person who acquires it one time have it in perpetuity? There's so many, photographers who have just said, as much as I like this and as much headway I made in the 70s and 80s, I can't stay with it. So I look forward to, kind of going through my photos. Fortunately, I did isolate some of my favorite photographers along the way. But that will be, more than a rainy day project. That'll be a blizzard winter to handle all those photographs and put them in some kind of order. But at least I have that, I think that that's the comfort zone that you put in your head as an archivist, as a collector, is knowing that you have something. And of course, what looms large are the 4 things that you didn't get that you should have had. 23 years ago, I should have bought that lamp. I forget all the 42 lamps that I already have, and think about the one that got away.
So you both saved a lot of things that could be in the trash bin at this point. What's the kind of forever plan for all your pieces of history? Do you have a plan?
You start, I don't have a plan.
I'm working on a book right now.
Yeah.
So, and I'm also an artist, so I make artifacts as well that I have to store, so you need a big space for that. And I'm still involved with the West End Museum, so we're always thinking, like, where are we gonna be when we grow out of that space? Like, David had to move to it, what was your space that you had in
Avon?
Avon?
Well, it was very compressed, basically I would fill up 50, 60 boxes at home, get a van, ship it over to Avon, put the boxes on a pallet. They would shrink wrap them so they wouldn't shift and move. Then the forklift would come and they'd put it in an industrial shelving hammock. And I had the mental satisfaction knowing I had these things, but I had no hands-on access for probably 25 years. So when we moved, it was 12 and a half tractor trailers. And we guessed about 8,500 boxes. And, that's been a process to put things in coherent order now, which is kind of delightful. Like I said, every day could be Christmas in the sense of opening a box and discovering something of consequence. The problem that I have is I wish I had an institution that I had an affection for, that I could park this and believe that they're going to do justice to it for eternity or 50 years. And I don't know what place that is. And at first I thought, a place like Boston University, where I actually got my master's degree, they have this place called the Gottlieb Center, and they have aggregated, I think, more than 2,000 personal collections, ranging from Martin Luther King to Betty Davis to Mike Wallace. But Gottlieb, I guess, retired, then he died, and he passed the reins to a woman who was, continuing in his sensibility. But then that woman left, and it seems to be dormant right now. I went to a reading of a book that was written by John Silver's daughter, and Silver was the controversial president of BU for a long period of time, and his daughter wrote the book about growing up with John Silver. And I talked to her afterwards. I said, well, are you going to entrust BU with your father's papers? And she said, they just don't seem to know what they're doing. So if somebody who has that logical connection with the university doesn't feel they have faith in the place, I don't think I want to explore that. Like I say, Northeastern has done a credible job with Stephen Medich's Phoenix and FNX files and archives, but I don't have any connection to them other than the year that I spent in the transference of all the content. And, there are places that house these kinds of things. There's Bowling Green University, who has a popular culture department. I think the University of Texas organization, like multi-locations throughout the state, they have been acquiring things like Allen Ginsberg's papers and Norman Mailer's papers. But, sometimes in, the depth of night, I would say, who appointed you, the guardian, to have all this aggravation that goes along with the great pleasure, without having a final game plan? And that's the thing. I'm receptive to ideas, but.
Yeah, I would think that you, are you going to kind of edit it down, your archives? I mean, maybe it would be difficult for someone to accept 5 truckloads of material. That's an awful lot of material to house. And would you be prioritizing and saying, okay, let's narrow it down to a half a truckload to find a place that would accept,
think the interconnected narrative almost, for me, mandates that it all stay together, because I could create a scenario, I could tell a tale of why something that's disparate from that, you know, why it makes sense. You know, even, I've done installations at the Verve, for example, where aside from having a theme like transistor radios right now, or, you know, the 40th anniversary when punk got traction in America, I would take on a decade, the 70s, the 90s, the 80s, and just do a complete installation. And I think that people, the one thing that is intriguing to me, because I'm dealing with people who are in their 20s and 30s at the Verve, they are all, you know, this goes back to the tangible artifacts aspect. They all want to know the backstory. You know, as much as they may be wedded to the technology that they have in their hands, they still want to know the real deal story of the artifacts that are in front of them. And I think that's what these installations allow, is to do the whole spectrum and the panorama of our lives and times. And so I wouldn't want to break it up and segment it, you know. I mean, there are places, you know, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, for example, you know, they focus on music, but, you know, I've got no connection to them, even though I grew up in Cleveland, you know. But, you know, there's the Paul Allen's Experience Project in Seattle. Jim Irsay, the owner of the Indianapolis Colts, came to town in July. He's a massive, massive collector. You know, his father bought the team for $14 million in the 70s. The team is probably worth $5 billion today. He can buy anything he wants. He bought the rolling scroll of Jack Kerouac's original On the Road. He owns JFK's rocker from the White House. He owns James Brown's boots. You know, he's got John Lennon's piano. So, you know, maybe someone with deep pockets like that would make a pledge that I'll acquire this and I'll give it the respect. But you're always just one generation or one person away from somebody changing their mind. That's the problem. Unless it's the Smithsonian, I don't know. Yeah. Did you have another?
I was gonna say, you should do what Isabel Stewart Gardner did.
Well, she was probably a
He's like, you can't change anything in
Yeah,
this
yeah.
house. Nothing.
I think she was of more considerable means than I.
Yeah.
So I'm taking up a contribution from her.
Well, thank you both so much. It was very, very interesting. Do you want to plug what you said you were doing tomorrow night?
Well, I'm doing something tomorrow it's actually a private event, but I will mention anyhow.
Okay.
My affiliation with Duane, and I do permanent installations as well as transitory installations at the Duane Theater, and in one of the downstairs areas is what's known as an acronym FARHA, Folk Americana and Roots Hall of Fame. And tomorrow there is a oversized check presentation being made to the widow and the two 12-year-old sons of Asa Bredner, who's a co-founder of Robin Lane and the Chartbusters. Robin Lane and Chartbusters will be playing tomorrow. And Asa was also a later day member of the Modern Lovers, but the thing that's being presented, the checks for, is a permanent acquisition of his folk art guitars, where he would take a basic guitar body and put all kinds of toys and trinkets and, you know, skulls and Happy Meals toys, and, you know, thematically it was just like hands-on, everything is fair game, and he created a number of these one-of-a-kind guitars, and they're being acquired from the family with a nice check for the kids' education fund. So that's going to be a ceremony tomorrow, but that's another sustaining relationship that I have with Duane.
I'll be talking to the 4 Point Neighborhood Association, another community group. We're doing our 43rd 4 Point Open Studios. So that will be October 13th, 14th, and 15th. It's a great take. The 4 Point was the first open studios in New England. Last year we attempted to recreate it. This year we kind of got caught by some, you know, in small organizations, it's always ebb and flow. But, you know, our goal is to sort of recreate the concept of open studios and make it more like a festival type thing. That people would actually come to an arts festival and then they could visit studios rather than people come to the studios to be the main, the sort of main draw. And that will be tomorrow night over at District Hall in the Seaport.
Great.
Yanni's
His neighborhood.
Yeah, right.
Thank you both so much. I think we all got quite a lot out of this, and many, many thanks for filming it.
Oh, thank you.
All right, everyone, there's a little bit of food left in the back and up here, but thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
All right.